Hey everyone! Tonight we're drifting back into a quieter, dustier corner of history. So if you're listening in bed, maybe turn the lights down a little. Get comfortable. Let your phone rest somewhere nearby, where it can slowly slide off the mattress later. Because tonight we're talking about royal women. Specifically, royal women whose kingdoms collapsed beneath them. Queens, empresses, princesses, women raised to believe the world was permanent, orderly, and divinely assigned. And then, very suddenly, it wasn't. History is usually quite enthusiastic about recording what happened to kings. They were executed, they were exiled, they were dramatically stabbed on staircases, or quietly poisoned at dinner. But royal women, they tend to fade. They vanish from the record like a dropped stitch in a very expensive tapestry. So tonight, let's gently follow them. Not with urgency, just drifting, watching what happens after the crowns are taken away. When a kingdom fell, it rarely fell neatly. There was no polite handover, no formal apology. Just fire, banners changing color, and a lot of men shouting about legitimacy. And in the middle of this noise were women who had been raised for one purpose: to marry correctly, to produce heirs, to symbolize continuity, which is unfortunate because continuity had just been cancelled. Let's begin in medieval England, because England is always a good place to begin if you enjoy quiet misery wrapped in ceremony. When King Edward II was deposed in 1327, because of course he was, his wife, Isabella of France, suddenly found herself in a very awkward position. Isabella had helped overthrow him, which already complicates the sympathy meter. She was nicknamed the She-Wolf of France, which is medieval code for woman who refused to sit quietly. After Edward's removal, Isabella technically ruled as regent for her son, and for a brief moment she was powerful, dangerously so. Naturally, this made everyone nervous. Once her son, Edward III, came of age, Isabella's usefulness expired almost overnight. She was not executed. That would have been rude. Instead, she was quietly retired. She was given a comfortable estate, a generous allowance, and a strict understanding that she would no longer interfere in politics, which is how many royal women ended up after a fall. Not imprisoned, not free, just placed somewhere. A living reminder of an inconvenient past. Drift now over to France, where fallen queens often found themselves in convents. Not necessarily because they were religious, but because convents were tidy places to store women history no longer needed. Take Queen Ingeborg of Denmark, married to King Philip II of France in the late 12th century. Philip decided almost immediately that he didn't like her. Historians still aren't sure why. Possibly politics, possibly personality, possibly the medieval equivalent of vibes were off. Philip attempted to annul the marriage. The church refused. So Philip did what any reasonable medieval king would do. He locked her away. Ingeborg spent decades in confinement. Technically queen, practically invisible. She wrote letters, she protested, she waited. Kings came and went, and she stayed. When Philip finally died, Ingeborg emerged. Older, forgotten, but still somehow queen. This was a common pattern. Royal women didn't always die when their kingdoms fell. They endured. Endurance, unfortunately, was rarely comfortable. Let's drift south for a moment, down toward Byzantium, where fallen imperial women experienced a particularly elegant kind of ruin. When Constantinople shifted rulers, empresses were often sent into monasteries, sometimes willingly, often not. Hair was cut, jewels were removed, silk was replaced with wool. And just like that, an empress became sister someone or other. Take Empress Zoe Porphyrogenita, who technically reigned in her own right. She married 3 emperors, because Byzantium loved efficiency. When political winds shifted, Zoe was exiled to a convent, later recalled, then exiled again. Power, for royal women, was less a stable position and more a revolving door. One moment you were crowned, the next you were praying quietly and hoping no one poisoned your soup. And soup poisoning was not unheard of. Now let's float eastward, toward Spain, specifically Castile. Queen Joanna of Castile, later known to history as Joanna the Mad, was a woman whose kingdom fell in slow motion. Her husband died, her father declared her unstable, her son eventually agreed. Joanna was not overthrown in battle, she was overruled. Declared incapable, declared inconvenient. She spent nearly 50 years confined in a palace. Not a dungeon, not freedom. A palace prison. She outlived everyone who imprisoned her, which is its own quiet form of revenge. Royal women often lived longer than the men who removed them. And there they stayed, witnesses to the passing of time. Now drift further south, across the Mediterranean. When the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia fell in 1492, the women of the Nasrid dynasty faced a particularly sharp ending. Queen Aixa, mother of Boabdil, the last emir of Granada, watched the Alhambra pass into Christian hands. Legend says she told her son to weep like a woman for what he could not defend like a man, which is dramatic and probably apocryphal. But Aixa herself did not vanish. She negotiated, she maneuvered, she ensured survival. Many royal women did exactly this. They adapted. Some converted religions, some remarried into lesser nobility, some faded into comfortable obscurity. Comfortable, at least, compared to execution. Now let's drift north again, to Scotland, where Mary, Queen of Scots, provides a particularly tidy example of royal downfall followed by prolonged discomfort. Mary lost her throne, fled to England, and spent nearly 2 decades imprisoned by her cousin Elizabeth I. Mary was treated politely. She had servants, she embroidered, she wrote letters, she waited. Waiting, as it turns out, was the main activity of fallen queens. Eventually, of course, Mary was executed, but for years before that she existed in a suspended state, neither reigning nor released. Elizabeth herself, incidentally, was well aware of how easily this could have done her fate, which brings us to an important point. Royal women knew the rules. They knew how fragile their positions were. They watched other queens disappear into convents, castles, or history, and yet they were still raised to believe in permanence, which makes their downfall oddly gentle. Not loud, not cinematic, just gradual. Let's drift east one last time for tonight, toward China. When dynasties fell in imperial China, empresses and courts often faced execution, but sometimes they were spared to live quietly, under surveillance. Former empresses became dowagers with no power. Concubines became servants. Titles remained, but meaning did not. They survived, which again was not always a kindness. Across cultures, across centuries, the pattern repeats. Royal women after the fall of kingdoms were rarely allowed to vanish completely. They were too symbolic. Instead, they were preserved, contained, neutralized, living reminders of what once was. And as the years passed, their stories softened. Their sharp edges dulled. They became footnotes. Tonight, as we drift onward, remember this quiet truth. For every dramatic king who fell in battle, there was often a queen somewhere else, sitting quietly, a crown removed, a future rewritten. And tomorrow night, or perhaps later in this same gentle journey, we'll drift into another royal inconvenience. But for now, just let these women fade gently into the background, as history so often asked them to do.
Let's ease back in. No rush. History will still be here if we take a moment to get comfortable again. Last time, we watched royal women lose their kingdoms. Tonight, we stay with them a little longer, because the fall itself was often brief, but the aftermath, that could last decades. Once a crown was removed, something curious happened. These women did not simply become ordinary, they became formerly important, which is a strangely dangerous thing to be. Former queens were reminders, walking, breathing evidence that power could slip. And because of that, they were rarely allowed to move freely. So they were watched, managed, politely restrained. Let's drift to the Holy Roman Empire for a moment, a political structure so complex that even the people running it seemed vaguely confused most of the time. When emperors fell out of favor or died inconveniently, their wives were often left stranded between factions, too prestigious to ignore, too risky to empower. Take Empress Agnes of Poitou, widow of Emperor Henry III, regent for her young son. She ruled competently, which was already suspicious. Eventually, the princes of the empire decided she was no longer necessary, so they removed her. Not violently, just administratively. Agnes withdrew into religious life, not in disgrace, not in triumph, just removed from relevance. And that, more than execution, was the preferred solution. Because killing queens caused paperwork, and unrest, and guilt. Much easier to let them live quietly. Now drift gently over to Scandinavia, where royal women were theoretically more respected, in practice, still disposable. When Queen Margaret of Denmark's father died, she was married off early, as expected. But when her husband died, she did something unusual. She ruled. Briefly, competently. Which meant that when political winds changed, There was no comfortable retirement waiting for her peers. But Margaret was the exception. Most Scandinavian queens, when their husbands fell, were returned to family estates, or remarried quickly, or politely encouraged to disappear into regional obscurity. Their names linger in sagas. Their lives do not. Now let's drift back to England, because England loved unresolved royal women almost as much as it loved creating them. After the Wars of the Roses, there were far too many women with claims. Widows of kings, mothers of lost princes, daughters of executed men. The solution was simple: marry them off, or keep them close. Elizabeth Woodville, widow of Edward IV, found herself in exactly this position. Once queen, then inconvenient. She survived by retreating. She negotiated. She stayed quiet. Silence, as it turns out, was a survival skill. Women who protested too loudly did not last. Now drift south again. Italy this time. Italian city-states treated fallen noblewomen like expensive antiques, too valuable to destroy, too awkward to display. They were placed in villas, convents, country estates, given allowances and instructions. One such woman was Caterina Sforza, a woman who refused to behave as expected. She fought. She commanded troops. She negotiated, which meant that when she was finally captured, she was imprisoned, publicly humiliated, and then released, because killing her would have caused trouble. So Caterina spent her final years in controlled obscurity, still famous, still powerless. A pattern we're beginning to recognize. Now let's drift eastward again, toward the Ottoman Empire. Here, fallen royal women faced a different fate, because Ottoman politics had little patience for lingering threats. Mothers of deposed sultans were sometimes exiled to the Old Palace, a beautiful prison. They lived surrounded by former concubines, former influence, former glory. The palace was quiet, too quiet, and the women waited. Some hoped their sons might return to power. Most were disappointed. The old palace became a place of memory and regret. But even here, execution was not always preferred. Survival was. Now drift gently toward Russia, where royal women lived with the constant understanding that tomorrow might be different. When sultans fell, their wives were often sent to monasteries. Hair shaved, names changed. They became nuns, not out of devotion, out of necessity. One day you were empress, the next, Sister Anna. And the bells rang either way. Now pause for a moment. Notice how often this happens. Convents, palaces, estates, contained spaces. Royal women were not released into the world. They were folded inward. Let's drift briefly to France again, because France produced an impressive number of royal women who survived collapse. After the French Revolution, much later than our medieval focus, but worth mentioning, royal women were imprisoned, humiliated, stripped of titles. Some survived. Many did not. But even before revolution, French queens often lived long lives after political defeat. They became dowagers, advisors without authority, symbols without power. And sometimes, they simply became inconvenient relatives. Now drift toward Central Europe, Bohemia, Hungary. Queen Elizabeth of Luxembourg lost her husband and then her political footing. She fought for her son's inheritance. Lost. She died in exile. Not poor, not rich, just irrelevant. Which might be the most quietly terrifying fate for someone raised to rule. Royal girls were educated to command, to represent, to endure ceremony. They were not educated to be forgotten. And yet, that is where many ended. Let's drift to one more place tonight. Japan. Imperial women in Japan faced a different version of disappearance. They often retained titles, but were removed from influence. They became ceremonial figures, living rituals. Their lives were rigid, structured, predictable, which sounds calm, but often wasn't. They lived long lives of formality, every gesture prescribed, powerless,
but watched. Now, as we gently wind down this part of our journey, let's gather these threads. Across continents and centuries, royal women after the fall of their kingdoms were rarely allowed to live freely. They were preserved, neutralized, contained. They lived long lives of waiting. Waiting for recall, waiting for forgiveness, waiting for death. Some adapted, some endured. Some quietly resisted by simply surviving longer than expected. And as history marched forward, their stories softened. They became supporting characters, wives, mothers, rarely protagonists. But tonight, as you let your thoughts slow, remember them. Not dramatically, just gently. Women who outlived their crowns, who carried their former importance quietly. And next time, when you're ready to drift further, we'll look at what happened to the children of these fallen dynasties. Because being born royal was never the guarantee it was advertised to be. But for now, just rest. History isn't going anywhere.